welcome to the August edition of the Cinetopia Show. I'm Paul Bruce, Director of the Edinburgh Short Film Festival, and with me is Amanda Rogers, co-founder of Cinetopia. Amanda, how's it going?
Good. It's festival season. I've been doing a lot of filming for fringe shows and, doing as much as we can. Not going to as much cinemas as usual.
So you're keeping busy?
Yes, very busy.
Good stuff. We're also joined by our Cinetopia regular, Jim Ross, manager of TAKEONE Magazine. Hi, Jim. What's been happening this month?
Quite a lot. As Amanda said, it's festival season, as you might be able to hear behind me, actually. But, a lot of film festivals going on, a lot of interesting films being released, so I've been very busy, and we'll be talking about some of them as ever on the show.
That's good. Glad to hear it. So with the Edinburgh Short Film Festival, we're very close now to announcing this year's programme, so we're very excited about hopefully finalising those details fairly soon. We're also holding an open-air garden cinema event as part of Scalarama, which we'll be talking a little bit about later. The garden cinema event's free open-air short films from around 6 p.m. on Sunday, September the 1st. And yes, we'll be looking forward to welcoming you along to that as well. Hopefully there'll be cupcakes and potentially nice weather. So on this show we'll be doing reviews of recent films out in theatres in the UK this month, including Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the supposed second-to-last film by Quentin Tarantino, as well as Pain and Glory by Pedro Almodovar and Joanna Hogg's The Souvenir. You may have noticed that the Fringe Festival is upon us, leaving less time for cinema events this month. We'll be getting a head start on some of the many events that are happening next month in the month-long celebration of cinema in the UK, Scalarama. So Amanda here sat down with Megan Mitchell and Sean Wells from Matchbox Cineclub to chat about their upcoming Weird Weekend Festival in Glasgow, as well as their coordination of Scalarama across Scotland. Then we'll do our first part of interviews with film societies across Edinburgh who will be programming this films across Edinburgh for this year's Scalarama Festival. Amanda, you've been coordinating that. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so we have a great a great lineup of about, I think, 20 different events.
Wow,
Cinetopia itself is doing 3 events. We're doing our monthly doc screening with co-curator with Serena Scateni, who we'll be interviewing later. And then we're doing Bend It Like Beckham with the Real Girl Film Club, which I think we'll be interviewing next month because we're doing the first half of the interviews in this month for our podcast. And then finally, we're doing Rocky Horror Picture Show. So that's going to be a really, really fun thing at Lee Theatre. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of the nice thing about Scalarama is that it's not just programmed by one festival. It's a bunch of different film societies around each city coming together, supporting each other, and the thing is there's really amazing curatorial talent, just like in all of these film societies. So it's really, really great opportunity to highlight all of that. And like you said, you're doing our first launch event for Scalarama on the 1st, right?
That's right, yes. We did this last year, didn't we? I think we were lucky enough to have quite nice weather and quite well attended. It's at the top of Middle Meadow Walk. I'm sure we'll all be looking forward to that. Hopefully the rain will let off long enough.
Well, it was a really nice night that last night last time we did it. But you have a new sort of tent over as well, or is it?
We're hoping for some form of protection from the elements, but we'll hopefully have that up and running in time. It might not need it, obviously. You can always be optimistic, So, Scalarama looks very exciting this year. There's a lot of, especially quite a wide range of films, from Inland Sea to the Rocky Horror Show, which will probably be, I imagine, very popular. So that's going to be at the Lee Theatre, is it?
Yeah, that's on the 27th of September.
So people will have to bring along their rice and...
Well, yeah, you can bring on your own props, definitely your costumes, and but there will be props available for sale too.
How exciting. Right, very much looking forward to that then. So, finally, Jim Ross will be interviewing Mark Jenkin, the director of the new film Bait.
So we're back, and we're also joined with our friend Luka Vukos, who's going to help us with the film reviews today. Luka, how are you doing?
Not bad. Reveling in the fringe.
Great. So a long-awaited Quentin Tarantino film is back, and for one time we all got together and saw it together, which is exciting to go to the film theater together.
On 35mm, no less.
35mm at Film House. It's currently playing Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is playing at the Film House and Cameo on 35mm, so that's super exciting. Luka, tell me a little bit about what the film's all about.
So as Paul mentioned, this is Tarantino's 9th and allegedly penultimate film. So I think he's got one more to go before he reaches his 10th mark.
Also, just bone of contention, is not his 9th film. It's his 10th film. Kill Bill was 2 films. I don't care what Quentin Tarantino says.
2 films, 2 tickets, right? So the film is set in the late 1960s, sort of at a point of transition in Hollywood between old and new. And it follows Leonardo DiCaprio's character, Rick Dalton, who is an actor, and his best buddy slash stuntman slash gopher, Cliff Booth, played by Brad Pitt, whilst in Tarantino fashion, simultaneously following Sharon Tate and her gallivanting around Hollywood, and then sort of counting down to the Manson murders. I have had an interesting relationship with Quentin. He is a filmmaker that, for a lot of people, particularly my age, and I assume with you guys as well, you watch him, you learn a lot by his films, and you learn a lot about other films, but you eventually you get tired of QT. And this is pretty much his masturbatory playground of references and vinyl records and everything. There is this film, it's everything QT, and that's going to put off a lot of people, but I liked it, especially in comparison to After the Hateful Eight, which was upon reflection a bit of a slog.
So I think Luca's kind of hit the nail on the head there in terms of it being, packed full of references, and I don't think you could possibly be in any doubt that Quentin Tarantino made this film. Yes, maybe the dialogue's a little less kind of snappy and quippy and witty than it was in his early work, but it's very much a Quentin Tarantino film. For me, it didn't really work quite as well. Now, I've been a big fan of Quentin Tarantino, and I think his initial run of 3 films, so Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, Jackie Brown also, I kind of credit that with getting me into film, to be perfectly honest, or at least thinking about it as something beyond, something to pass the time. Since then, I've had a bit more of a mixed reaction to it, and I think he does collapse into self-indulgence very easily. Now, sometimes it works, because certainly Pulp Fiction is like that, and there are other films where that works. For me, it worked in Django Unchained. It also worked for me in The Hateful Eight. I really like The Hateful Eight. But there are also films where it really doesn't. And the thing it reminds me the most of is actually Kill Bill Volume 1, which was very packed with references of East Asian action films, anime, and all these things that he loved. And whilst it's quite good to see that passion on screen, for me, this was basically the equivalent, but for old Hollywood. And there's plenty to like about the film, which I'm sure we're going to go talk about shortly. But for me, it was just too meandering, and that's not to do with the length, crucially, because as his films go, it's actually kind of a standard sort of length for his films. But for me, it was very meandering, and it didn't really coalesce into something which I think would resonate beyond people who also share that level of passion that Tarantino does. It didn't quite come together for me, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I heard this film was fantastic and amazing, and at Cannes it was, really, really lauded, and the performances. And I was not expecting the film to kind of be so quiet. There's a sort of quietness to it, or like you said, meandering. And but I also think it is very much a love letter to LA, and it kind of fits within those genres of films like The Player, the Robert Altman film, and just about old Hollywood. And there is something really lovely about the way everything was shot, and that the performances, and certainly you could see these actors, Quentin Tarantino and as well as Quentin Tarantino, and the 2 actors. I think Leonardo's a little bit younger, but they're dealing with that kind of sort of age frame where they were really, really big things, a few years ago, and now they're coming into that kind of thing. So I think they were probably very method in the way that they respond, and it came across really, really, really wonderful for me. So I did enjoy it. I just didn't think maybe it was as funny as I expected it to be. Maybe a little bit more melancholic, and was slightly a different tone. But then while I sat through it, I quite loved it.
So yeah, it's very much Tarantino lamenting the passing of an age. Now, without kind of going into the trajectory the plot takes with like the Mansons, who are, it's interesting that the film got, when it was initially in development, there was a lot of talk about, Tarantino's making a film about the Manson murders. This is very much not about the Manson murders. It's using the Manson murders as a signpost, a waypoint, a milestone in the history of Hollywood to signify the passing of an age. He has very much used it to hang this fondness and nostalgia for old Hollywood upon it. And the two characters that we follow, Cliff Booth and Rick Dalton, so Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio respectively, I think you've also got it correct there in that they are dealing with, are they relics, are they dinosaurs, and is the industry and like culture in general moving on from them? There is a little bit of meta-ness to that, particularly when you think about the way Tarantino himself has been regarded in recent years. I mean, certainly in the post-Weinstein world, I think a lot of people are questioning his conduct and behaviour. To me, it is very there's all these different bits to it, but it is too meandering. Now, he's done this with his films before, but they've kind of got an explicit chaptered structure. And I actually think this film would have worked better if he'd done that, because the Rick Dalton storyline, the Cliff Booth storyline, and the Sharon Tate storyline, right, so Margot Robbie is Sharon Tate, they do all intersect. They are all related. I mean, like the conceit is that Rick Dalton lives next door to Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski. But to all intents and purposes, they don't really overlap until the finale of the film. I mean, they intersect at points. It's exactly the same setup that he had in Pulp Fiction. Separate characters, separate storylines, but they link together and coalesce into some sort of climactic finale. It's a similar thing going on here, but it's just too meandering. It's not punchy enough to bring you along with each segue.
I agree. I think the idea of characters finally intersecting at the end, for me, usually, like, if you look at Inglourious Bastards, I think that was a case of characters intersecting, but largely because of plot, because like characters had the same motivation. Here, it is super interesting that, without spoiling anything, the two parties of Sharon Tate, of old and new Hollywood, intersect, but it is interesting to have them be neighbors. And there's a bit at the end that's probably the most melancholic moment after a very specific sequence. That's literally old Hollywood being accepted into the gates of new. At the same time, I think the meandering thing is, it worked for me in a way that it hasn't for a Tarantino film before, because there's a lot of sequences in this film of actors just lounging around, because like in between takes, and like there's an entire extended sequence that's with DiCaprio talking to a girl that I think is based on Jodie Foster. I think Tarantino has said. And for me, this entire film, especially when we get into the final part of it, and the fact that the title is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it is, to me, it's like the pipe dream of an actor in downtime. It's like it's some imagined thing that he sort of conjured up here, and like that for the meandering works in that respect. Because I think DiCaprio said as well, this is like a day or two in the life of these actors.
But that's the thing, right? It's a day or two in the life of these actors. If he had a more disciplined focus, right, I really do think this film could have worked fantastically, right? Because if you take any one of the individual strands, like so the standout scene for me, and this the Manson Ranch, right, the Span movie ranch that they basically lived on. There's a scene where Brad Pitt finds himself at that ranch, right, and it's super tense. It's incredibly well shot, and it's a little bit like that tension that Tarantino brought to a very claustrophobic space in the opening scene of Inglourious Bastards, right, where Hans Landa confronts the French farmer who's, hiding Jews underneath his floorboards. It's like he's taken the tension of that and he's somehow extended it to this dusty, yellow-lit California landscape, and it's really fantastically done. But the problem is, either side of this, you've got, Leonardo DiCaprio acting, you've got Sharon Tate going to see herself at the cinema, and all these different bits, they all have their own really great bits to them. But it felt like somebody had taken a mini-series and just thrown it to me. It felt like somebody had taken a mini-series and thrown them all together. I don't really know what he's trying to say by telling these stories simultaneously. And it's this lamenting of an age where he just kind of wants to throw everything on screen. It felt like it was the first or second draft of the script made it up there.
Well, I think again, I think it goes back to this idea of like you said, like a new time, like an old time meeting another time, and then right now we're in that maybe phase for him. You know, he's still filming on 35 millimeter, and we're moving into the digital era and stuff. And I think this is like a lot of it was pulling stuff about Hollywood today that's still like a part of their lives and reflecting on it and the oldness, the nostalgia that is still what LA is. It's an homage to an old LA, but also a love letter to a city that's still thriving.
To the point as well, as I was talking with Jim, when you look at the casting for the Manson family, you like a lot of them are daughters primarily of famous people. So you have Margaret Qualley, who's Annie McDowell's daughter. You have I think Johnny Depp's daughter's in there, Kevin Smith's daughter's in there, and then Ethan Hawke's and Uma Thurman's daughter's there, and they're sort of the villains. They're like they're it's weird. They're new Hollywood, but they're like demonic hippies. I don't know what Quentin's trying to say with that.
Who knows? But it is a Quentin Tarantino film, absolutely. So if you like Quentin Tarantino and you like Hollywood, and if you're a cinephile of sorts, as at least Luka is, I think this might be your film of the summer. We're back, and the next film we're going to be talking about is Pedro Almodovar's Pain and Glory. That also premiered at Cannes this year, and I think Antonio Banderas won the award for Best Actor, correct? Yeah. So it's, Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit about the film?
Okay, so as you said, Pedro Almodovar, and it's a fairly autobiographical thing. It's Antonio Banderas is playing a Spanish film director, Salvador Mayo, who is very obviously a version of Almodovar, even up to the point where if you look at the hairstyles that Antonio Banderas has given, it's that kind of like shock of, standing up hair that Almodovar is quite famous for. And basically, we pick up with this guy after he's not been making a film for a while. He's suffering from various physical and mental ailments, and he's kind of a bit of a shadow of his former self, really. And we get this montage early on of that. So we're following him in the present day. We get flashbacks to his childhood with his mother, played by Penelope Cruz. And it's really just following him reconnecting with various different things. And the instigating incident is a local cinema is doing a retrospective of one of his most famous films, which was made 32 years ago. And they want him and the actor that he fell out with and rather infamously had a falling out with on the set and afterwards. And he hasn't spoken to him since the premiere of that film. It's basically, that's the instigating incident, and that causes the film to follow him reminiscing on his life, reconnecting with people from different segments of it, also looking back on his art and what is sparking life and creativity in him now. And basically we are with him for the whole film, and we follow him through those different kind of events as across about a week or so, but there are frequent flashbacks to different parts of his life.
Yeah. And what did you think of it?
I thought it was absolutely wonderful. Mm-hmm. I really liked it. Now, I've generally liked Pedro Almodovar's films. Ironically, I'm not terribly familiar with his stuff from pre-1990s, which obviously plays into this. So the film, the fictional film that Salvador Mayo directed that instigates this is, I think, was it Sabor, was it called? So I'm not really sure what film, if any, that would correspond to in Almodovar's filmography. But it was really wonderful, and it contains all the sort of things that you would expect from Almodovar. Like, there's fantastic use of colour, like there's red, like, everywhere in here, and this extremely kind of like, very precise set decoration, and all the rest of it. I think what the difference here is, now I haven't seen Julieta, I have been told a lot of people think it's very similar in the way it approaches its characters and story to that film, which I've not actually seen, but it's a very personal film. It's very character driven, and I think Antonio Banderas is wonderful in this. I really am not surprised he's got a lot of plaudits for it. I really actually think it might be one of the best performances from him I've seen, to be honest.
Yeah, it was incredible. And we were talking about certain moments in the film. Again, another film about filmmaking and a film director kind of in the later part of his career, or filmmaker of some sort. My favorite part was the moment where there's the Q&A scene and they didn't arrive because of what they were doing. I'm trying not to spoilers anymore, but they were broadcast in there. It was quite, for someone who loves Q&As so much, it was such a great scene. And I completely agree with you. I mean, I was a big Pedro Almodovar fan when I was younger, and so and this just reminded me of why I love his work so much. It's so stunning, and the acting is such amazing. It's really empathetic, and you could really dislike this guy, but I feel like there were so many really empathetic scenes, when he meets his former lover again, and there's so many great moments in this film.
Incidentally, when he meets his former lover again, I've forgotten the name of the actor who plays him, unfortunately, but I think they would win the award for best silver fox couple. I mean, an impossibly good looking pair of men, quite frankly.
And making out, it was just like, wow.
Yeah, that was one good looking couple, but the film overall is really great, and I think what's quite interesting about it is it's not particularly telling a story, I don't think. I mean, obviously it's rooted in the story of Salvador Mayo, or Almodovar by a different name. It's rooted in the story of his life, but it's painted in little vignettes. It's almost like you've got different segments, and they're like very, you've interspersed with almost like short films covering his childhood even, or something like that. But by the end of it, you have a really beautiful picture of this central character, played fantastically by Antonio Banderas. And I think all the supporting characters around about him, like his personal assistant come agent, his mother, both the young version of his mother played by Penelope Cruz, and the later version, sort of like just before she died. I mean, it's not really given. His mother dies at some point, and it's all these things where it's painted as if he's coming to terms with them, right? He's coming to terms with his own personal history, his mother's death, his physical ailments, but it comes out that way to begin with, but it's not actually that. It's more about reconnecting, so he reconnects with his former lover. He gets a little bit of artistic inspiration again. Now, the catalyst for this is, I think we'll go with it, right, because it happens quite early on. Basically, like, heroin plays a role in this, right, and the journey he goes on with that and how it affects him is a very interesting one, because you're used to watching films where like drugs are kind of like the start of a spiral,
right.
But the thing, what happens when you've got this person who's got the weight of everything that's happened to them before and the state they're in now? What happens then when they already feel like they're at rock bottom? And it was an interesting and a different dynamic for that sort of plot than I've seen before.
Right. The one thing I have to say, and it's my really picky thing, is that when they're showing sort of his ailments in his heart, like they sort of turn into some weird animation, and it felt like a corporate video or something like that to me. I don't know why, but it just, you have all these really beautifully set scenes, and then then it's kind of goes into that bit, and it just felt like it pulled me out a little bit. But that's also probably because I've done a lot of corporate videos in my life or something.
I kind of agree with you on that bit, though. Like, fortunately, it's quite short, and so but it did feel well, because the thing is, it starts off the intro, like the actual intro credits are absolutely beautiful,
stunning. Yeah,
it's kind of like this effect of kind of like marbled paper that's moving,
right? And
like it's really really beautifully done. And then in very quick order, you got something where, okay, it's not completely lacking in artistic, because it's Pedro Almodovar that's done it, right? There's lots of interesting stuff going on in it. But it is a little bit like Pedro Almodovar like directed a Nurofen commercial for like a really short period for some reason. So that bit, I agree, didn't quite work. Fortunately, it moves on from it, and then I think what's strange about it actually is like that kind of visual aesthetic is never revisited for anything else in the film. It would be one thing if he came back to it for other stuff.
Well, and I'm glad he didn't.
Yeah, but he doesn't. It's a very standalone part. But that happened. It happens early and it moves on from it. From then on, it's fantastically realized, impeccable, and I really loved it. I really thought it was great.
Yeah, I think we're both in agreement, and I think we're all unanimously agreeing to that you guys should go see it. Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next one we're talking about is Joanna Hogg's latest film, The Souvenir, which premiered at Sundance Film Festival earlier this year. It was also at the Edinburgh International Film Festival, and we talked a little bit about it in the Take One special. So also ask you can go back and see, there's about 5 other people who talked about their opinions on this, and I think we might have an interesting sort of debate. There was an interesting debate then, and there might be an interesting debate this time. And it comes into theaters in the UK August 30th. It is said to be a semi-autobiographical film about Hogg's own experience in film school. It's starring Honor Swinton-Byrne, Tilda Swinton's daughter, Tom Burke, and Tilda Swinton herself. I love films with Tilda Swinton. Maybe that's my problem. The main character is Julie, played by Honor Swinton-Byrne, a young, well-off young woman who is trying to make a film, attending film school. And much of the film shares this process of working with it seems to me somewhat pretentious film teachers. She's also coming from like this well-off background, so there's a lot of commentary about elite people and their lives and whatnot, but it's in a somewhat of an empathetic way. At some point, she meets an older man who works for the Foreign Office and who's played by Tom Burke, and the film really eventually moves into this like story of a toxic relationship, and we can go into more detail about that, but that kind of takes her away from her film process. But I find it interesting that the 3 films that we are talking about are about filmmakers. They're about filmmaking. Some of them are about heroin. So, but it is interesting because this is coming from the younger perspective of looking back on your life and when you were first starting, and the inspirations and the trials that you did versus Pain and Glory, which is about kind of the end of your career. But I really loved it. I mean, I got also this idea of shooting on film. She shot a lot of it on 16 millimeter, I think, and then parts of it with a 16 millimeter kind of lens or a filter or something. But I just thought it was really like it was beautiful. I loved the soundtrack. I loved the acting in it, and I think like it's not meandering, but it's quiet and quite stunning. And I think I'll watch it again and find more life. And I thought it was quite lovely. How about you guys?
I liked it. I don't know how apparently there is a sequel coming out, and I don't know if I want to see it because I think this is right. Am I right?
Well, it says part 2, but I thought that was a joke. Is that not?
No,
true?
It's got a Wikipedia page.
Oh.
It's happening. Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm not sure I want to see that second film, not because I didn't like this film, but because like I think there's something complete about this film. I thought the format was interesting, the 16 mil. The drawbacks that I felt, first of all, was I do think is like it has like the languid pace and air of a Merchant and Ivory film, which like, I mean, they're good films, but actually they're great to watch on a Sunday, but not during the week. And I think you're right about the filmmaking classes. Like the performances in this film are super interesting in, I hate to bring up his name, but in a Ken Loach kind of way, in the sense that they're so naturalistic to the point where
absolutely.
Those filmmaking scenes, those sessions are really sometimes awkward. But at the same time, yeah, performances are great. Tom Burke is great yet again at playing a twat. But time is really interesting in these films we've been watching. This film is a Victorian film set in like the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
And like to the point where the framing is something like the Souvenir. It's a reference to a little painting from the 1700s or something. And then some of those shots, if you guys remember, of the main character sat sick in her bed that has like a golden frame.
Right, it's like a throne.
Yeah, and then the very fact that Tilda Swinton's in it, like that's a Victorian film. But I think, I mean, yeah, that's what I initially thought, and I think the narrative structure is super interesting. I mean, like particularly with Tom Burke's character, the conversations usually are like in that wide sort of shot, like hardly any close-ups, except when people are sort of connecting through touch, and it's like a miracle. It's like when the people are touching each other, just like these really grainy, noisy shots of like their hands and stuff like that. But then the way he treats his characters is still detached, and like you know, not to spoil anything, but Tom Burke's fate is, as Tilda Swinton says, the worst. He sort of like really goes down that heroin road. But the way his character is dealt with is like, it's like he's in the film, and a lot of the shots are of the back of his head, but then like he slowly like dissipates from the narrative. But he sort of just disappears from the story, and that's his end. And I thought that was interesting. Yeah.
He disappears from the story, much like my interest in the story. So first off, like because honestly, I'm going to try and keep it short, because the special we did during the festival, I rambled on about this film then, and I'm going to try and not subject you all to it again. First things first, the performances are great. It's a beautifully made film. You can tell that Hogg is a filmmaker who has a clarity of vision, and the way that she wants to present her characters is very deliberate, and it tells a story quite well. That I'm not, you know, any criticism I have of it, don't let that detract from it. However, the backdrop to this story is just so impossibly dripping with privilege that it becomes incredibly distracting. Now, the film wants to deal with this, right? It has, in particular, so basically the film that Honor Swinton-Byrne's character is trying to make is basically a sort of an allegorical biography set in Sunderland, right? An area of the country that she admits she doesn't know much about, and naturally she gets questioned about how she's going to make this film. And when she tries to express what the film means to her, how she's going to make about it, you know, at parties in her swanky Knightsbridge apartment, which we'll come back to, she can't do so, right? And that's an interesting aspect, this lack of ability to express yourself. However, it doesn't really, the privilege which seems to prevent her from making the film, right, because she maybe can't relate to it, it doesn't really do anything with it. And when you then bring in I think Anthony is the name of the character, it then starts to go, in my view, some slightly weird places with how they present that relationship, right? Because it then takes this relationship which develops into a toxic one. It starts off maybe as, you know, a little bit of like the, you know, mansplaining as we call it. It starts off a little bit with that, and then it develops into something which is a lot more troubling. And it's almost like by the time we get to the end of the film, this is like the creative impetus. It is awoken the artist in her, and she can express herself. And I really have a problem with that arc. I have a problem with that message. And it drops in references to the privileged position of this character, but it's not, to me, it's not commentary. It's like trying to address it because they know that people like me are going to have a massive issue with it. The one that sticks out is, you know, somebody says, oh, well, maybe you don't need to worry about budget in Knightsbridge, when she's trying to kind of like figure out how she's going to fund this film. But to me, it feels like it's paying lip service to it. It doesn't feel like a commentary to me. It's backdrop that are kind of like, okay, we've seen this, we've acknowledged it, but now we're going to move on.
See, I disagree, and I think I think about the difference between Sofia Coppola, who makes these films about rich elites all the time, and how I'm the number one critic of Sofia Coppola, and how not aware she is of, you know, her privilege, and where this has this kind of sense of awareness to it, and I think it's deep in every single moment of this film. The trips to Venice and sort of this borrowing of money and these little kind of, and the throne, and like the actual like art direction of this film has privilege all around it, but it also has it sort of in this empathetic way, which I think Hogg is known for, and in a lot of ways it was a very important part. I think I don't think it was just thrown in. To me, I didn't think so at all, and I actually think it was quite well handled.
Well, I think, like, Jim, you're right to a certain extent. I would agree to a certain extent, like, at the beginning, that there was literally a character who says, "Ooh, that smacks of privilege." I immediately, at least for that segment of the film, I don't want to spend any more. I don't want to spend 2 hours in the company of these people. But I think the problem with the film in that regard is the fact that people are signposting all this through dialogue. That people are literally, it's not just naturalistic. It's literally saying, "This is the plot, by the way." Like, the filmmakers are saying, it's like, why don't you just deal with stuff that you know? This is all stuff that the film can tell visually. I think, like, the beauty of the arc is that it is someone that is way over her, like, in over her head, and like was like, I'm going to make a film about a working class person like in Sunderland, when in fact she's living a life. Amanda, earlier you said like that, like she has this relationship, and it sort of makes her, for at least 6 months, it sort of affects her filmmaking that she's not attending class anymore. But ultimately it ends up affecting her filmmaking in a very positive way. Despite the strife and struggle with Tom Burke's character, she finds the story to tell.
This is, and don't worry, I'm not gonna go on too long on this, right? Because I could, and I'm trying not to. That's kind of my problem with this. It's art. It's another portrait of, to create true art, you must suffer. And I've seen this story so many times, and no matter how well acted this version is of it, no matter how well shot this version is of it, it is that story. And I have an issue with that story, but even then, to me, it doesn't actually fully grapple with it in a meaningful way, to me.
Well, and I think of when you're saying this idea of discussion, and that part of what I enjoyed about the film was the annoying discussion. And I'll tell you, I love the scene, and maybe this isn't reason, I love the scene with Richard Ayoade, who is, talking about film school and why is it necessary, and and it sort of explains the heroin problem that that's in her relationship. It clarifies those kinds of things that, like, and that's the point. It's a discussion about filmmaking, which is so pretentious, but that is who we are, as filmmakers. And I think, like, it becomes, we're talking right here about filmmaking over and over and over again. And I think it's calling into question that and kind of making light of that. It's also making light of it's not making light of it. It's making the fact that, that these people who are privileged have those kinds of privileged problems, and it's discussing it. It's not, it's,
but I think like some of those dialogue scenes could have been cut a little bit, because like if you can,
I hope they're not.
But if you look at it in contrast, those dialogue scenes to, for example, if you guys remember the shot when her parents are over in the flat, and there's a beautiful shot of her father's, sitting at the table with one of those mirrors sort of cracked. That's telling a story right there, and the film knows how to do that, and it knows how to use silence. It's just that for me, if there's one detraction,
that film is lost in translation. There's very little conversation in that, where like you have all these like lyrical shots and stuff, and I don't think that's this film. I think this film is people in conversation over their issues of filmmaking, which is slightly silly.
That's fair. I just think they should have been just like it. I mean, this is not Quentin Tarantino overindulgence. I just thought, like, Jim, just calm it down.
No, I mean it's still overindulgence. It's just of a different flavor. The thing is, I as I've said earlier, this show, right? This is what I always seem to come down to with this. I would encourage people to see it, right? Because I've seen so many different reactions to this. I think mine is one of the strongest against it I've come across. I saw it at a press screening at the film festival, and I heard people around me talking about it. Honest to God, I thought I'd watched a different film. But what I will say is it's a very well-made film, right? I cannot for all the issues I might have with the narrative and the way some of the characters are presented, I cannot fault the filmmaking itself. I can't fault the performances and how genuine they come across in trying to paint the characters that they are. So there is a very sincere aspect to this film, which I think is worth seeing for that. My issue is just my reaction to it. In some ways, when it drops in these things related to the privilege of the people there, I'd actually, in some ways, prefer they hadn't done that. Because if it was a story of privileged people with their, very, upper class British problems and, related to, in her case, her filmmaking career, that's fine. I mean, these people exist, they have problems, and those I'm not saying those stories shouldn't be told. My issue is it feels like it's trying to address concerns which it didn't need to, and in doing so, it acknowledges they're there, and then doesn't do anything with them. That's really my issue with it. The film itself, though, is impeccably made. There is plenty to recommend the film. My issue is just I found the backdrop to the story and how it acknowledges that backdrop, but then doesn't really grapple with it or deal with it as I would have liked. And, that's tough luck. I didn't make the film. It doesn't, it's not a film made for me. That, to me, I then just find it incredibly distracting from then engaging with the characters in the way that I think I was supposed to.
Yeah. Well, I disagree, but, I've said what I've said. I agree with you, Luka, that I feel like that Victorianness of this film and the way that it was shot is just quite lovely. I can't wait to see it again. Give it some time.
And part two.
Give it maybe part two. I really thought that was a joke.
No, it is. It's up on IMDb.
That was my weird part. Was like, what part two?
Yeah.
Like, what are you, Back to the Future?
Yeah, no, it's in post production apparently.
Oh,
yeah.
okay, all right. Well,
So
I guess
there
there's a
you go.
lot more to talk about privilege then. Well, anyway, so you see, we have multiple opinions on this, and choose for yourself.
So I sat down to speak with Mark Jenkin over Skype about his new film Bait, which is coming out on August 30th. It's actually coming to Edinburgh a little bit before then. It's going to be at the Film House on the 27th with a Q&A from him. It's a very unique film, shot on 16mm without any sound. He dubs it in afterwards. He hand-developed the film. It premiered at Berlin, and it's a very interesting film, so I think he was a good director to speak to. So we'll go into the interview now, and I started off by just asking him to tell us a little bit more about the plot of the film and how he came to make the story. First of all, congratulations on the film. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I saw it back at the Edinburgh Film Festival.
Ah, brilliant. Thank you.
So I think just for folk who haven't seen it, because obviously we'll be broadcasting this just before it comes to the Edinburgh Film House, can you tell us just a little bit more about the film and the story of it to kind of set the scene for how you then approached it?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny talking about the story now and the themes that are involved in the film, because I've been out at festivals so much with it and doing a lot of Q&As and that kind of thing that I'm a bit lost as to what I think the film is about and what other people have told me they think it's about. So in some ways it's a film about fishing. In some ways it's a film about Cornish traditional cove fishing. In other ways it's about gentrification. It's about class. It's about alienation. And in the context of the moment, it seems to be more and more considered a film about what happens when people who don't feel they're listened to for whatever reason decide to kind of kick back. That seems to be the modern context. But when I came up with the idea 20 years ago, it was really at the height of the summer in Cornwall, where Cornwall was really busy with the bit of Cornwall that I was living in, North Cornwall. It was very busy with a very specific set of visitors who were quite young people, who were mostly private school educated, who came down en masse in their groups from their schools, and were really a stronger community than the local community that had become very fractured due to the decline of traditional industries. And then what actually happened was, over the years, you then got other groups from other schools who were coming down, and there sort of seemed to be this sort of antagonism between the school groups, and this ended up with, you know, huge fights and disturbances in North Cornwall, and this was kind of probably 15 years ago by the time I've been developing the film for 5 years. And I just got interested in where the sort of locals were in all of this, and so I decided I wanted to make a film about a fisherman, and it could have been about anything. It could have been about a farmer or any kind of traditional person working in a traditional industry. But I really wanted to make a film about the fishing community as well, because it's a community that I've always grown up around, and a community that I think has always been badly represented on screen and simplified. And there's stereotypes that have lived long regarding the fishing industry, when actually they're all nonsense. So I think it was a combination of all of those factors. And then during the 20 years that the project has been developed, and I haven't been working on it constantly for 20 years, but yeah, I've picked it up several times over the years. It's changed into something else, really. But the heart of it is still wanting to show the fishing community, but also just show that what happens when a community becomes alienated, disenfranchised, and that kind of thing. And I think to some extent the success of the film has been due to a bit of luck with regard to timing and what's going on in this country, but all over the world in terms of the gaps between the haves and the have-nots growing.
Yeah, there was something I wanted to ask you about, actually, because I've noticed that it's become, mainly because of something that it seems to have been inserted in the sound edit, quite a strong Brexit parallel with this. But I was wondering what your view was on this, because I have to be honest, I really liked the film, but that part, or at least it being as explicit as that, kind of slipped past me as I was watching the film. It felt a lot more rooted to me in the characters and so forth. So what do you make of well, first of all, you can maybe explain like how that's actually happened, but what were your feelings on that when that analysis kind of started to take off about the film?
It was a surprise. It was a huge surprise. What happened was that when we were just about to complete the film, and we were in the final stages of the sound mix, and there's scenes in the kitchen of this holiday home with the sort of lead incomer family, and there was a scene where there was dialogue between characters, but it was very fragmented, and I became very aware that there was a silence over the scene that made the scene much more ominous than it needed to be. So I thought we need a little bit of background noise in the kitchen. So I thought they'd probably be listening to the radio. They'd probably be listening to Radio 4. The radio would be on in the background all the time. So I thought we can just fix this in the mix. We can just go and record a little bit of Radio 4 style sound to go in the background. So Kate Byers, who's one of the producers of the film, is a voiceover artist and was an actor. So I just got her to write a little piece, a little Radio 4, not a news report, but a kind of current affairs thing. And she wrote it very quickly, went into the voiceover booth, and we just recorded it straight onto the soundtrack. And it was about Brexit, so it was a discussion between. It was actually Lynn Waite, who's the other producer on the film. She played the other character within this kind of current affairs report, and it's them discussing Brexit and what may or may not happen. And I thought nothing of it. I mean, can't even remember whether we discussed whether it would be about Brexit. I think it was just unsaid, because you know what it's like at the moment. I mean, we seem to be on a little bit of a hiatus from it at the moment, maybe because of the summer, but you switch on the radio or the TV and it's all been Brexit. So it's not something I even really hear anymore. It's just white noise in the background, and that's what I really wanted it to be in that scene. So that was recorded, it was dropped in. I didn't really think anything of it. I mean, I did slide it slightly on the timeline so that a shot of some fresh fish being handed over in the visuals then married up with the sound of them talking about imported chlorine-washed chicken from the USA. Because I just thought, that was, there's a nice little bit of juxtaposition. But it was never meant to be a statement on Brexit one way or another. And I didn't think anybody would notice it. But what then happened was we went to Berlin for the world premiere, and the German subtitlers, because, as I say, this was quite a fractured scene with quite a lot of silence where the characters weren't talking, in that silence was this radio report, and the German subtitlers subtitled the radio report. So suddenly this Brexit stuff that was being spoken in the background that I didn't even really notice was suddenly at the foreground. So one of the first questions in the Q&A at the world premiere was a question about Brexit. So I thought, right, this is, it's a tricky enough topic. It's a really tricky topic. If you're from a fishing community, tensions run incredibly high about it. And so I thought, oh my God, here I am going to be the unofficial spokesperson for Brexit at Berlin. But it wasn't, it was never meant to be foreground. It was always meant to be background. But it was interesting because then people did start to read in, is the whole film an allegory for Brexit? And if they see it as that, then of course it is. But it was never my intention for it to be that. And I think you saying that it maybe passed you by is probably because I think the English-speaking audiences and the non-subtitled screenings, I think it does operate as a background noise, and it's the subtitles that bring it to the foreground. So also, I think having travelled around Europe with the film, I think people in Europe, my experience, are keener to talk about Brexit than we are, really. So I think it's more, they want to know what's going on. So as soon as there's a little signifier in there about Brexit, that people seem to hook onto that. Whereas I think, certainly from my point of view, I recoil from it if I see signifiers about Brexit, because it's all a bit too grim at the moment.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the technical approach you've taken as well, because obviously that's quite a striking thing about the film.
Yeah.
One thing I was wondering about is quite a lot of filmmakers speak about how creativity comes out of restriction, effectively. You can have people with enormous budgets and it feels like they can do anything, but it's almost like they're paralysed by choice. Is that something that you were consciously look for in the approach that you've taken with the hand-developed film, no sound is shot on location, things like that? Is it looking for a restriction which makes you think creatively about how you can capture the story you want within that?
Yes, exactly. It's about realising that I can't compete in terms of resources and budget, so it's not a level playing field. We can't, if you're working on a low budget, you cannot compete with multi-million-pound films with huge crews and huge resources. So in one way you think, that the odds are stacked against us, but where the player field is absolutely level is in terms of access to your own creativity, or your own creativity. Everybody's got that in one way or another. What the limitations allow you to do is just to force to think creatively straight away. So we're getting ready to shoot another film in the spring, and it's getting to the point where I've redrafted the script several times. Now I need to lock down locations, and I won't be able to get the locations that I'm imagining in my head because they're imaginary. They don't actually exist. So I need those locations. That the film's going to be set on an island. We're not going to film it on an island, and it's mostly set around a cottage on an island. We need to find that cottage. At the moment, the idea in my head is that it's a cottage that's on an island, and I've got 360-degree shooting. Straight away, it's not going to be on an island, because like I say, we're not going to shoot it on an island. Secondly, we're not going to be able to shoot 360 degrees because there'll be something in the background that gives it away that it's not the right location. So suddenly I'll go, right, okay, I've got a 90-degree angle to shoot this with. I've got a very small angle that I can shoot this with. So then I rewrite the script based on just using the front of the house, for example. What then happens is that when the film's done, what's happened with Bait is this kind of like the formalism that a lot of people have commented on. And the rigour, that isn't set out beforehand. That's dictated to me through schedule, budget, locations, and that completely informs the way that the film looks. And then I kind of embrace that, and then that becomes the film, because then the film exists as an object, and then it's as if it was always meant to be that way, but it isn't. I think it's very disempowering to have complete freedom, complete artistic freedom, because you are kind of blinded by choices, and you never do anything because you're always thinking, well, there's a better thing that could come along. But if you're told, or you tell yourself this is all you've got, then you just get on with it. And working under restrictions, it's the sort of sad truth that you look at great cinema, it's always important to look at what restrictions it was made under. If you look, I just listened to a podcast about Tarkovsky's Stalker the other day, and just thinking about somebody like Tarkovsky, the restrictions that they would have to work under, creative, artistic, logistic, and the amazing art that comes out of that. So yeah, the restrictions are hugely important. And in fact, on Bait, we lost some money not that long before we were going to shoot the film, and the producers and myself had a conversation, and we've realised we had to lose something from the script because we couldn't afford to shoot everything that was on the page, having lost this chunk of money. And originally, the two brothers in the film were at war, but they both had fishing boats, and the younger brother had a smaller boat than the older brother.
Okay.
But a lot of the confrontation between the two brothers happened at sea between two boats, and so the obvious thing to lose when we lost some of the budget was to cut one of the boats. So we cut the younger brother's boat, which meant that then there had to be a rewrite, and the rewrite I came up with was that he would instead he was shooting a net off the beach. Now that was, I wouldn't have thought of that, but I had to think creatively, and that becomes really for me and for a lot of the response I've had to the film, that becomes such an iconic piece of action and piece of work. This sort of desperate guy who's a fisherman that hasn't got a boat. I wouldn't have written that in the script unless I'd been forced to come up with a solution to that boat issue.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because it really does add quite a very striking contrast to the situations. He's still going in there with his hands and trying to get it done.
Yeah.
While there's these tourists and holidaymakers basically gallivanting around on what would have been his boat.
Yeah. Yeah, and also you then the fact that the Hugo character, the holidaymaker guy who goes spearfishing, he's then on the Martin, the younger brother fisherman, is then on a parallel with this leisure hobby holidaymaker fisherman who's actually got better gear than he's got. So then all of this other sort of subtext and juxtaposition comes out of it, which again I would never have written in the script because I'm not that good a writer.
The one other thing I want to ask you about in terms of the story is just whether it was informed by your own experiences of how certain communities are portrayed on screen. Because something I found quite interesting was, like, we follow Edward Rowe as Martin, and everybody we're following, they're locals. It's a reasonably sort of rural, in the sense of being seaside community.
Yeah.
But what was interesting about it was that we are following the people of that community. It's not being used as an awakening, if you like, for some sort of privileged urbanite, which is something that happens quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if that played into how you came up with the story and what the focus of it actually was.
Yeah, completely. I wanted to redress the balance a little bit. Cornwall, and I talk about Cornwall because it's where I'm living and working and where I'm from, and the place I understand, and I'm sure it's similar in other regions all over the world, but Cornwall's used as a background, a backdrop for other people's stories all over, all the time. And like you say, I like that you said awakening story. It's exactly it, isn't it? It's normally somebody from the city who kind of thinks they're happy, ends up in a rural environment through some sort of misadventure normally, and then but through an interaction with the simple indigenous folk, they learn a life lesson which then they can take back to their other life. And and there's no, I mean, I hate the expressions character arc, but the locals they never have any sort of narrative journey. They're just background. They're just devices to to help the more sophisticated character refine their existence.
Yeah, it's a straight, almost like kind of a strange, slightly banal form of like exoticism.
It is, and that character, the character never really. The character who comes into that community sort of takes the good stuff and goes away, like community spirit or collectivism or whatever it is that they learn in a rural environment. But they don't have to. They don't then stay and sort of live through the winter or the poverty or anything like that. So it's all a bit sickening, really. So it was about redressing that and actually showing that the people who live in a place like Cornwall, whether they're Cornish or not, that what they do to get along and how people live, and the good side of it and the bad side of it, and just to bring that texture to the foreground rather than it being a background, because it is very rare that people do that, and there are exceptions. I mean, I would say that a film like Local Hero is kind of a film that really does nail that, mostly because of the ending. And that seems to be, that final shot where there is I always think that's a little bit of a reference to the films where everything is fine once the protagonist goes back to their urban life, But and something like Local Hero, which is so sophisticated and so dripping with humanity for all the characters, it really nails that. But that's a very rare example of this type of film working.
It's funny you say that, actually. Local Hero is probably one of my personal favourites, but that is one of the things that I quite like about it. It has this, if you strip the story down to its bare bones, it's quite archetypal in that manner. But the manner in which it's handled is just so much more empathetic and intelligent than I think you often find, and I find that in Bait, obviously from a different focus perhaps.
Great.
That was definitely there.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, with Local Hero, first time I saw it, I just didn't get it at all. I'd heard so much about it, and I watched it, and then at the end I was like, I don't get it. Who am I supposed to? Whose side am I on? And then it stays with you. And then I was thinking, that's the point, isn't it? You can kind of empathise with everybody and nobody, and that's life, really, isn't it? It's not as simple as it is in the movie. So although I'm not interested in realism or naturalism, I think that kind of empathy for people who maybe you haven't got a lot in common with is really interesting in cinema.
So you were here in Edinburgh for the Edinburgh Film Festival, and you're coming back on the 27th of July, I believe it is.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
What I was wondering was, are you hoping, because there is a lot about tourists coming into a community, kind of changing the character of it, maybe short term, and the impact that has on people's lives. It's actually a discussion which is happening in Edinburgh quite strongly. I was wondering, are you hoping that there's maybe a bit of resonance with the local audience on that level? Because I don't know if it would have come up during the film festival, but certainly when you come back with it this month, it's going to be immediately after the Fringe Festival and the international festivals has finished. I was wondering if you'd thought about that at all.
I've thought about it a little bit, and I mean, I've thought about it in reference to Cornwall more in terms of when the film's being released. So, I mean, because today's the 16th of August, we've got our first Cornish preview tonight, and then I've got sort of 5 dates in Cornwall, and then the film's out on the 30th of August. And I wonder whether by the end of August the film's going to be riding this kind of populist wave of sort of end of the summer, bring on September and the quiet months sort of sentiment within Cornwall. So maybe it'll be the same in Edinburgh. It's 27th of August, so it's kind of just as the festival's finished. So who can tell? What I have learned is that it's not a film. Bait isn't a film about Cornish fishermen and holidaymakers who visit Cornwall. It's something that's much more universal than that. And I think probably that's what I was hoping it was. But having gone out around the world with it, everywhere I go, there's communities that feel that they haven't got a stake in their own future. And I mean, when we were in New York with the North American premiere at the Walter Reed at Lincoln Center, and this woman came up to me at the end of the film and said, she said, "Thank you, you've made a film about my dad, and he was a fisherman all of his life in Barbados, and it was, you know, the similar story, and I think I never realised that maybe the film was as universal as it appears to be, because I think the sad truth is there is probably a lack of discussion about the way communities are being and you know, in cities and rural areas and whatever are being changed. You know, who's making these decisions to change places in a specific way, and who are the people who are losing out in that, and who are the people who haven't got a voice. So yeah, I mean, it will be interesting to see. There's some dates on the preview tour that I'm doing that I'm thinking maybe, you know, is that going to resonate there? You know, is that, you know, and normally places that I'm normally quite surprised in those places that there is some kind of similarity with what's going on in a Cornish fishing village and in the centre of what appears to be quite an affluent urban area. So maybe that will be the same for Edinburgh. I mean, also the thing with, I'm quite interested in the Scottish independence issue as well as I am with the Catalans. So whether, you know, what people kind of read into that with regard to the Cornish issue as well, and how well known that is. Although it's not addressed in the film, it's kind of, I think it's there subtextually. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what a sort of local Edinburgh audience make of it, rather than a largely visiting festival audience.
You're clearly a filmmaker who's very invested in the process of making the film and what that can bring to the storytelling and how it harmonises with the look of the film to actually really kind of heighten the impact of it. And there's a lot of films now where there's limited screenings of it, and they tend to be quite big films. I mean, in terms of stuff that's coming out at a similar time to this, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is getting 35mm screenings. There's films in recent years where they get limited runs on 70mm, which is happening less and less. I suppose I'm really just looking for what your views are on those sort of screenings. Do you see that as a preservation of a way of creating a story, or do you think that maybe it's being approached in a slightly gimmicky fashion in some cases, or if it's maybe a bit of both depending on the filmmaker?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it is. I mean, as far as what I'm doing with Bait and how we're exhibiting it, which is sometimes digitally and sometimes the 35mm print, I think it's difficult to say, because that would be more to do with the perception of from other people. But the way I look at it is, at the moment, anything to get people into theatres, I think, is to be encouraged. I think it seems like the cinematic experience in some ways is becoming more in line with like a theatre experience, where you pay a premium and you go for a meal at the cinema, and you know, and it becomes a real evening out rather than it being a normal kind of a more sort of populist art form. And I suppose with my film, I was always thinking that would be the area that we would be in, you know, the very art house circuit I thought we'd be in. But I think for whatever reason, and you know, I don't know, maybe it's just down to making a good film, maybe it's to do with the story, maybe, you know, who can tell? I wouldn't like to say, but there seems to be a little bit of crossover that we're enjoying, where we may well just be in some cinemas where it's just the film and it's projected digitally and the ticket price isn't extortionately expensive and all of that kind of stuff. So I suppose from looking at it in the sort of eye of the storm that I'm in at the moment, anything to get people into theatres, get people away from, well, not away from home streaming and all that, because that's all great, but just getting people to experience that theatrical experience. And I think to
continue, it's something worth continuing and preserving and getting people in to see.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, my partner's boy, who's 11, he watches movies, and he watches a huge amount of movies, and he watches them at home, and he watches them in the cinema, and I think he knows that there's a huge difference between going and watching something in a theatre and watching something at home. And I think that gives me a lot of hope for the future of the form, whether he's in a huge minority, but he doesn't seem to be by the amount of kids who still go to cinema screenings. So I'm not massively precious about how films are seen, because how my films are seen, because I make films in an analog world, and I like the craft element of it. I consider myself a working person who's come from a working background, so physically making a film is really important for me, not as a statement particularly, but just because that's the type of person I am. So stood up, using my hands, using photochemical processes, using a manual camera, shooting it myself, cutting it myself, all of that kind of stuff. That's really important for me. Whether that's imbued within the final work, that's for others to say. But I don't make the work in the way that I make it as a statement. I just make it because that's what excites me when I go to bed on a Sunday night. It's the thought of working on film like that makes me excited to get up on Monday morning. So I'm not really thinking about anything other than my own enjoyment at that point. But I do understand that the large proportion of my audience are in a digital world. So although I make the films in an analog way, I'm quite happy for them to go into a digital world and be consumed in whatever way an audience wants to consume them. Obviously, sitting as we did the other day in NFT1 at the BFI in London and watching a 35mm print in a 500-seat auditorium, that's obviously a high point. But I don't, I'm not expecting that to happen in every single town and city in the country. But like I say, maybe my aspiration for the film was to get on a handful of screens. It seems to be we're going beyond that. So to think that it would be screening on a DCP in lots of screens, I'd be very happy with that.
The fact of the matter is, if you want to get films out to people and have people making films as well, then I don't think cinema has the luxury of being precious about it.
No, absolutely, and I think, and you can't have it two ways, really. I mean, I'm in a position, I'd say I'm in a privileged position, but I've kind of, I don't know how privileged it is really, because I still work on tiny budgets, but I am in a position where I shoot on film. But like I say, the digital distribution has been incredible. We've got a cinema in Newlyn, which is the fishing village I live just up the hill from. We've got a 2-screen digital cinema. Now that wouldn't exist if digital distribution didn't exist, and I'd quite happily watch something that's been shot on film and projected by DCP. I'm not, not the kind of cheaper the running costs of these cinemas, hopefully the lower the ticket prices are going to be, and the more accessible cinema is to the masses, which is, it was the art form of the masses, and I think it still is. It's just maybe the theatrical experience isn't for the masses anymore. But I've been reading about cinemas and the cinemas that I'm going to on this tour who've got a slight enhancement on ticket prices in order to offer lower ticket prices for other people. And I just think things just getting people in and just making it cheap and affordable. We got a screening up in Newquay on Monday night, and it's £5. All the tickets are £5 to get in. And I just think things like that are so great in terms of getting the younger generations into the habit of going to the cinema, and a habit based on the exhilaration of watching something on a huge screen communally. And I think, with the Tarantino sort of 70mm roadshow stuff, I think that's great, but it is almost like it's a marketing thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
The tour, the circus comes through town, and I know when the Hateful Eight went to Leicester Square, and then in Glasgow was the print that was in London, and I said, what, it's the same print? He said, yeah, of course it is. It's a 70mm print. There was only one in Europe, so that can't be a form of distribution. If you've got one print.
Yeah.
Because by the time it goes around all the cinemas, films can be 30 years old by the time every cinema's had it. But in terms of getting that publicity up and charging a premium price, and you get the booklet and all of this kind of stuff, and the people who can afford to do it or who can't afford to do it but are determined to do it because they're cineasts or huge fans or whatever, I think that's great, because that helps the word of mouth, and it does kind of, it does single cinema out as an art form that's very idiosyncratic, which I think is one of its selling points. It doesn't necessarily mean you then have to go and see it on 70mm. But I mean, when Dunkirk came to Cornwall, I didn't go to the local cinema. I drove an hour to go to another cinema to see a 35mm print in a screening that was sold out.
I did a similar thing myself when I was living in Cambridge when Paul Thomas Anderson's The Master came out.
Oh yeah.
And it was like, it's like a 40-minute train ride to London or something.
Yeah.
So I popped on it and went to the Odeon Leicester Square. It seems a bit overkill looking back, but I'm glad I did.
Yeah,
it,
but you're talking about it now, aren't you? I mean, if you'd gone, would this even be a story if you'd gone and to your local cinema and seen the DCP of it? And I think that's the thing is that, life is about experience, and and sometimes, travelling to do something or going that extra mile makes the whole experience very distinct. And I think that's and going to the cinema has always been a special experience. I think we've got a preview screening up in town in North Cornwall called Wadebridge on Sunday, and that's where I grew up. That's the cinema that I went to every weekend when I was growing up. It was like a second front room sort of thing, me and friends, and I still remember all the films I saw, and so it's kind of emblazoned into my memory. So I think that the more we can preserve that, not for the sake of nostalgia, but for just the sake of that it's an amazing experience even now, then whatever way we can do that, I think we should be doing it.
With Megan Mitchell and Sean Welsh from Matchbox Cineclub. Thank you guys so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Cheers.
So tell me a little bit about Matchbox Cineclub. How did it all begin?
Well, it was founded by neither of us, by a chap called Tommy McCormick, who was inspired by cine nights that he'd been to in Iceland, primarily short film nights. At the time in Glasgow, he felt that there wasn't a presence for short films on the big screen, so he started doing short film programs, future shorts programs in the CCA. And then after a minute, I was interested in getting into film programming, which is notoriously difficult to get into unless you already have a path. And I got in touch with Tommy, who was a pal, and said, if you want to bring these nights back, I'd be up for helping out. So then we started doing things. We did some pop-ups in Nice and Sleazy and the Old Hairdressers. We did the cinema tent at Down the Rabbit Hole. And then we started a residency at the Old Hairdressers, which ran for about a year and a half before we moved to CCA. And then we had residency here for a while. And then we started doing pop-up events more irregularly and segued into doing more weekend festivals like Cagerama. And yeah, that's pretty much what we've been up to. We do pop-ups in different venues. We've done some stuff in Edinburgh before as well, further afield. But mostly, in terms of what the driving force is, it's films that you can't see elsewhere. That's the kind of the through line.
So I think our ethos of Matchbox boils down to the outcasts, outliers and orphans of cinema. And I think we've expanded on that in the last couple of years with our slightly larger tentpole festivals. So Weird Weekend's a really good example of almost the pure part of our programming. So it is entirely films you can't see anywhere else. And then we've got our other two tentpole festivals, which are KeanuCon and Cagerama, which are obviously films that are more widely accessible, screened more often, but we build around them in a way that it's an event that wouldn't take place otherwise. We do like to keep it fun, and we like to make sure that audiences that come to our events are getting something that they wouldn't get anywhere else. So we're very keen on making sure it's a special event, making sure it's accessible. We've started using sliding scale ticket pricing for everything that we do. So you can purchase either a free ticket or increments all the way up to about £8. And that's based on your income and how comfortable you are. And that also means that people can come along if they can't afford a ticket, or they can give a wee bit more if they can. And we've also recently decided that we're going to caption all of our screenings for deaf audiences.
Yeah, we try to I think you said that we try to have a sense of fun about it. We try to figure out what the through line was through all our programming, because obviously we started out with this kind of relatively strict idea of the films we screened you couldn't see anywhere else. The films we screened you couldn't see anywhere else, but we realised we wanted to do things like Cagerama, which was a weekend festival of Nicolas Cage films, and that came from a place of love, primarily because we both love Nicolas Cage kind of unreservedly, and so it wasn't a really difficult thing for us to make that leap, like just instinctively to want to do it, because no one else was doing a Nicolas Cage Film Festival, so there was that part, the fact that this was an event that wouldn't happen unless we were doing it. But the other thing we came to realise was that we really are about cult audiences as much as we are about cult films. So it's actually not counterintuitive to be screening Con Air if we're screening it in a programme of Nicolas Cage films. It never really gave us a pause to programme it like that anyway, but we realised after the fact that's really what we're doing, is making these films available to audiences and also catering to these audiences that exist for cult figures.
Yeah, so we're into our second year of Cagerama. We've just finished presenting Cagerama 3D, which was a double bill of 2 3D films with Edinburgh International Film Festival, and we'll be back again in January for Cagerama 3 in 2020. And we'd started doing Cagerama, as Sean was saying, quite organically from our own passions. I am the world's leading academic in the Nicolas Cage film Valley Girl, 1982. So that came from a place of love, and then I think we started to look at these cult audiences, this idea of cult actors, and Keanu came from that, and then we'd actually sold out KeanuCon quite well. We had to move it because of the art school fire in Glasgow, and the CCAir venue was shut, so we pushed it back a bit, and then about a week before we delivered the festival, it went viral. We had people from all over the world covering us. We got a mention in Vice, AV Club, New York Times was talking about us, 24-hour Nigeria, all over the world, and we had people and audiences reach out as well, really interested in that. So for us, that was really fun. But then it was also then the same week having to deliver that festival to an audience that doesn't care that we went viral, they just want a good event. Yeah. And I think for us that was more fun because it was just the exact same thing we always do. It's just more people were talking about it.
I think we realised through that because obviously there's a train of thought that says if you can have this huge viral coverage, and people automatically were asking us when we were bringing it to the States, and we didn't really think of it that way, but immediately people were telling us it was the first ever Keanu Reeves Film Festival, and like the stateside's outlets were saying that, so that was kind of a surprise. But then people were automatically asking us to bring it over there to do a repeat and to do it bigger. And I think through that, through the kind of coverage and how we had to deal with that, we kind of realised that what we want to do is we might lose some kind of essential part of the way that we present and deliver these festivals by having it even in a 700-seater cinema. So I think what we'd like to do is to keep our events accessible at a certain level and do more of them. And maybe, I guess it's slightly. I mean, it's not to say we'll ever kind of repeat the kind of the wild reaction to KeanuCon. I think that's probably unlikely. KeanuCon 2020 is already on sale, but even if so, I think it's equivalent of a touring band playing several nights in a smaller venue as opposed to a bigger venue. We would prefer to have that kind of interaction with the audience, and I think also there's people that come to our events that would be less comfortable coming to a bigger event, and that's kind of, we wouldn't want to lose that. So that's been a learning curve as well. It's obviously been great to get the positivity, but we also again just accidentally kind of caught onto this worldwide wave of Keanu love. He is the internet's boyfriend, and we were just a tiny aspect of that.
This weird weekend coming up, tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, so as Megan was saying, that's kind of returning to our kind of core programming of films that are hard to see. And so we did this last year for the first time. It was in June last year, I think. I know that it was June because it was roasting and everyone on the screen was melting. So basically the ethos here is we try to find films that are under-screened or are lost or have brand new restorations, and in some cases are like premieres. So it's a real eclectic program, and this year we made a real effort to make sure it was 50-50 F-rated, and at the same time, this is the first time that one of our festivals is going to be completely captioned, open captioned for the deaf and hard of hearing, as well as the first time we've had sliding scale tickets for each of the individual events. We try to keep our tickets reasonable anyway, and the weekend passes are still available. They're not on a sliding scale, but we try to keep them as cheap as possible. So so the programme itself is probably the best known film is The Burbs, the Joe Dante's The Burbs, which even so is one of Joe Dante's more the cultier end of Joe Dante's filmography. We're lucky enough to have Joe agree to join us via Skype for a Q&A after the screening, and we're also going to be screening the work print of The Burbs just to make it more obscure and more smart arse. So, but what we're going to do is we're going to screen in one room. We're going to have the work print, and another room simultaneously we're going to have the recent 2K restoration. So you're going to be able to see both versions. So that's the most mainstream event, and then we have a whole variety of things from AGFA, the American Genre Film Archives, recent 2K preservations of Sarah Jacobson's films. She was a filmmaker just at the end of the 90s who sadly died very young, but she made a handful of films, but really just the one feature, Mary Jane's Not a Virgin Anymore, and a really distinctive short called I Was a Teenage Serial Killer. So we're going to show those back to back, like I say, in these new 2K preservations, so they're dead shiny. As shiny as they're ever going to be, because they're like 16mm and like deliberately punky and kind of aesthetic. So that's going to be cracking. I just used the word cracking. Should you take over so that I don't do that again?
Well, I think probably the title that we're most excited to be able to screen is Nothing Lasts Forever, which is a lost Bill Murray film. So it has never been theatrically released. It probably never will be. The only way you can see it is on 35mm in an archive print. So we've got the archive print coming to us, and we'll be screening that on Friday night. So that's something that's really special, and I think that we're really pleased to be able to present something in Glasgow that wouldn't be screened at all otherwise.
Yeah, I guess I should say that one of the real driving forces for Weird Weekend was to give us a way to screen these films that people hadn't seen before, because it's a really tricky thing. I'm sure anyone that's ever tried to put on a film, to screen a film that people haven't seen before will understand it's tough, because you have to tell the audience what it is, and so cult films are necessarily have a niche audience, and so it's exponentially more difficult to get people to see a cult film that they've never heard of. So this was a way to answer that, was to do a festival of it, and at the same time we really felt that Scotland, although it has a number of amazing genre film festivals, including Dead by Dawn and Fright Fest when they do their Glasgow leg, they're more horror focused, and we really wanted to see something like Fantastic Fest or Fantasia in Canada, and these festivals that are screening these more general cult films, like whether it's sci-fi or just weird drama or comedy, just whatever it is, it's got that angle of oddness to it. And so that's really what we were aiming to do with this, and we'd like to keep on building and make it more of a regular kind of tentpole landmark event, and hopefully at some point it will be. The ambition is to have Scotland's Fantastic Fest.
Oh, great. Scalarama, something I know a little bit about, but why don't you tell us a little bit about the Scalarama, what it's about, how it all began, and your involvement?
Sure, okay, well, the Scalar cinema, which is the inspiration, was a kind of legendary rep cinema in London. It had a number of different iterations, but the kind of the golden era, or the last golden era, and really the one that we kind of hark back to, was in the kind of 80s and early 90s, and they had a really eclectic program where they would screen high art films and absolute trash, and quite often on the same bill. And so it's the legacy of rebel film programming, and the eclectic lineup that really feeds into Scalarama. So Scalarama was born out of a season which was a tribute to the Scala. A couple of guys called Michael Pearce and Phil Foxwood did a season called Scala Forever in London, which was in lots of different venues in the similar fashion to Scalarama now, because of course it's a season of films that takes place across the whole of the UK. So this was just in London, and they had a number of different cinemas and exhibitors, film nights and things, doing films that kind of paid tribute to the explicit programming of the Scala. The next year, some people, I believe it was Certificate X Film Club in Manchester, wanted or asked if they would take it on tour. And Michael and Phil's response was that was anti the spirit of the thing, and really they should do it themselves. And so, when you're saying it, well, that sounds kind of rude, but it was really positive. And basically they said, you can make it your own, and that's really how they've went ever since. And so it's expanded year on year. It became Scalarama the year after that. It was Scala Forever, Scala Beyond, and then Scalarama. And then it's kind of gradually creeped its way across the UK and become bigger and bigger ever since. There's over 70 events across Glasgow, Edinburgh, the Highlands and Islands. Those are the broad areas: Glasgow and West, Edinburgh and East, Highlands and Islands. But we have activity taking place in West Lothian and Berwick, which is technically over the border, but they have a big audience in Scotland, as well as being awesome. So it's kind of worth bending the rules for them. And all around, really. I'm not sure if I'm forgetting anything. In Prestwick, which is where I'm from, we've got our first event in Prestwick this year. And so it's a really, really big and diverse programme, diverse in terms of the films as well as the exhibitors themselves, because Scalarama is it's a network as well as a season of films, as well as in some sense just a film festival, but it's becoming more and more like dark matter that just exists everywhere, and so we can absorb whole film festivals into the programme. So that's why you'll have Berwick Film and Arts Festival, and we used to have Squiff, but Squiff moved their dates because really the only caveat for Scalarama is that it takes place in September. Secondary one is, I guess, that it's film related. So we can absorb whole film festivals into the programme, and as well as people that are doing things year round in terms of like Matchbox, or specialist cinemas, or people that just want to do a standalone one-off event just because they have a passion project.
Yeah, so we've got a co-presentation with Queer Classics, who's another independent exhibitor in Glasgow. So we're showing Seahorse, which is Jeannie Finley's brand new documentary about this trans dad, Freddie, through his pregnancy and birth. So it's this really touching, intimate portrayal of parenthood and self-identity and how they interact. We are then, the very next day, curating a programme of short experimental films from Japan from the 70s and 80s. Called Kaleidoscopic Realms. So that's the first in the season, looking at experimental Japanese cinema from that period that we'll be doing. And then we're also presenting with the brand new film club, Diet Soda Cineclub, the Teen Apocalypse trilogy from Gregor Ake as well.
Yeah, really looking forward to that one. That's Diet Soda Cineclub is the really cool thing about Scalarama is the number of times that people start film clubs and little platforms for screening films for Scalarama and then continue doing it, or people that bring dormant things back and then it kind of is a good spark for them to keep doing it. And so Diet Soda Cineclub is one of those, but it's kind of it has one foot. Sarah Nisbet, who was a Scalarama coordinator in Edinburgh last year and also runs Real Girl Film Club, is branching out with this kind of different sphere of programming, and so we're really proud to be able to like collaborate with Sarah on this project. So now it's going to be brilliant to screen those 3 films back to back. I think it's a funny thing because it's been really important for us for Matchbox, and Scalarama has been a good vessel for that, is to help people keep doing it, because it's if you're doing it properly, it's really easy, I think, and I'll reserve comment on like people that are screening films without licenses, because it's really easy to just rock up and screen a film with like a DVD. And sometimes people are naive about that, and sometimes people are just doing it because they wouldn't be able to do it otherwise. But if you're going to do it with a license, as obviously technically you need to, it's hard because that costs. The venue often costs money. It costs you money to market it. So it's really easy to lose a lot of money, and then obviously unless you're independently wealthy, God bless you. It's really hard to keep going if you're going to keep losing money. So one of the things it's been really important to us is to try and pass on any help we can give to people to keep on doing stuff. And that really is one reason why we want to keep going, is for that reason. That's really rewarding. And
yeah, and I think as well, it's easy to forget that programming is a creative endeavour in itself, and I think that there's some things that you stumble across when you're programming and you think, actually, I really want to show this to other people, and programming is just an extension of that. Like, look, see, this is like so good, look at it. I think for myself, it's also like slightly out of spite. Like, for 10 years I've been programming films and existing in the film industry, and I don't think I'll ever stop, entirely driven by spite.
Yeah, so. We're just too stubborn and spiteful. We just enjoy it. Like, the thing about screening films is, for me, is like we get to show films to people, which is great fun. We get to make posters, which is fun. Sometimes we get to cut trailers. We get to do research, which is fun and rewarding. It's actually really amazing when you finally find a license holder, or you finally get permission, or you get in touch with a director or an actor or a producer or anyone that you admire or that's an interesting person. You get to chat to them about things. And then, it's also just really rewarding to be able to screen films that are like the way that we chose to approach it and show films that are hard to see otherwise. We can show films that are really the best quality possible. That's part of what the work we do behind the scenes is like, which is maybe invisible again, is like we don't stop at finding a DVD. We try to find the best digital version, the best that we can screen. If we can screen from a DCP, we will. 35mm if we can, and all of that is really rewarding. I think it's all kind of a creative endeavour in itself, and so as long as we can keep feeding the cat, I really can't stress that enough. He is a hungry cat. He's a chunky boy.
Well, thank you so much for being with us, and I'm looking forward to a weird weekend and Scalarama.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So in September, once again, Edinburgh Scalarama will be returning to screen a range of programmes and films across the city. And as part of that, we'll be doing a series of interviews, short interviews with some of the programmers from this year's event. So the first interview is with Serena Scateni, who's with us today. Hello, Serena. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about the film you're screening? It's Inland Sea, isn't it?
Yeah.
The Japanese documentary.
Mm-hmm.
So it's part of the regular Cinetopia DOC Club, which will be forming part of the Scalarama event this year. And you've programmed Inland Sea. So tell us a little bit about the film.
So as far as this film, I wanted to catch it like 2018 Berlinale, but I couldn't really manage, and I was so sad about it. But after a while, after a while, the streaming service Movie decided to offer like a retrospective on Kazuhiro Soda, which is the director of the film. And then so I could finally watch it, and obviously, I mean, I was so intrigued by the film. It's like an amazing kind of observational documentary, because I mean it's how you call the documentary of this film director, like observational documentaries, because basically what it does is like rolling the camera and then like observing everything and everyone that was happening around him, and that's it. So
it's like a fixed camera point, is it? And then you just
I mean,
see
he
what
doesn't
happens.
have any script, anything at all, doesn't have any theme. So we're basically following like a kind of set rules. You have these 10 rules, like 10 commandments or something like that. And then so it just, roll the camera and everything happens. You observe and that's the film. So to just telling a tiny bit of the plot of the film, he was doing like another documentary in this like fishing village in Japan, which is called Ushimado. And then when he was here, he wanted to to film like the oyster factories and the fishermen in the village. And then after a while, he met this old fisherman called Wai-chan, who is like 86 years old, and is basically the last living fisherman in this village in Japan. And then after a while, another person came into the frame, and then so it just kept filming stuff and people. And then in the end, when he shot everything, he realized he had like so many stuff, not only for the first film, which came out like almost 10 years before Island Sea, and which is called like Oyster Factory. Then I realized he had like so much frame and stuff, he could basically come out with another film altogether. And so that's how Island Sea basically was born.
And so what was it about the film that really made you want to screen this to audiences in Edinburgh?
Well, apart of being like a really kind of a sentimental and melancholic documentary in terms of the fishing village is kind of a dying place in Japan, because of there are so many like old people and there's pretty much no youngers, and so you can have like these a glimpse of what it means to live like in rural Japanese countryside. But apart from that, I think it was something because the film is set in a fishing village on the coast. It kind of reminds me of like some of the kind of the villages you can see on the coast in Scotland. So I thought, fish and like this kind of industry could be something that could appeal to people living here. There's also like the shore in Edinburgh, so there's this deep connection between like the city and the sea. And so I thought it could be something that could, strike a chord with like people living in Edinburgh as well.
Yeah, well, that's true, I suppose. And I think that within Land Sea, this is your first featured programming event. Is it? Yeah. Okay, so we'll obviously wish you good luck about that. So where is the event taking place?
So the event is taking place at the Edinburgh Film Guild on September the 2nd at 7 o'clock.
Okay, and how much are the tickets?
£5.
Okay, where can people find out a bit more about the programme and the festival in general?
Yeah.
Is there a website?
Is there the... Is like the event on Facebook, so you can just head over to the Cinetopia Facebook page and find out everything about the event or the program on Scalarama. Just check out the Scalarama website.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks for that. Thanks for coming along, and I wish you obviously all the best with your film screening.
Thanks.
And we'll look forward to watching Inland Sea later next month.
Sure.
So, the next in our series of interviews with the programmers of this year's Scalarama Edinburgh, we're delighted to welcome to the studio and none other than Andy Danet. Andy, welcome.
Hiya, how's it going?
Not bad. Yourself?
Grand.
Good. Glad to hear it. So, tell us, you're showing two feature films, Electro Moscow and Young Soul Rebels. So, what was the thinking behind programming these two films? Could you tell us a little bit about them?
So, so that it was just really like hearing about Scalarama and then the opportunity. They were like, for new programmers, young programmers. This kind of idea of just getting people up on their feet and getting them into the idea of like film programming and exhibition was really exciting. And for me, I mean, I've got like, here we are in HFM, there's a lot of like a heritage and culture surrounding like club and music culture, which is where background's from. So I had this wonderful opportunity to be screening at Sneaky Pete's. So immediately there was this kind of, I guess, how would I say it? Kind of direction or like path that kind of led me on to like the idea of just doing music films or like cinema that's revolved around the culture.
You're also a DJ, aren't you?
Yes,
right.
yes,
so
I am.
So it's a good link with Electro Moscow.
Exactly. So Electro Moscow being about electronic Soviet music post-war till today.
Wow. Okay.
And then
was that legal?
Well, part of it is a lot of it's done like clandestine. A lot of these guys that they're interviewed, they're very much like hidden away. And then as the story goes on, you kind of see people that are still very much part of an underground, but maybe a bit more legal. But I mean, there's the Theremins covered in it, Leon Theremin and whatnot. So you're really kind of seeing this huge kind of like vivid painting of like how much Soviet music, synth music at least, inspired and influenced the world over,
So that sounds fantastic. You're also screening Young Soul Rebels, different kind of music. But that's a feature film, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a feature film. So they're both. So the first one is going to be Young Soul Rebels on the 14th of September, and on the 20th of September, it's going to be Electro Moscow.
Okay.
And I chose to do one documentary and one fiction feature length. And Young Soul Rebels, as you said, different story altogether. 70s London, new wave, reggae, pop, and just kind of sound system culture, and it's by the director Isaac Julien. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Isaac Julien.
You're doing a good job.
We'll be all right with it. But he's just finished having a huge exhibition down in London, and just been a big fan of his work, like particularly Looking for Langston. And this movie in particular, I was like, oh, this is the movie I want to see in a nightclub, because I think there's many of us in here that we've watched enough films about DJs and DJ culture, and we've been watching it like behind our eyes or hands and heads, just how absolutely cringe it is. And I think this is the only honest portrayal that we've had of proper DJ culture, and so I'm really, really glad to be sharing it in Sneaky Pete's.
So both films are screened in Sneaky Pete's?
Yeah.
Right, great. And so what are the dates again?
So the 14th of September and the 20th of September.
And how much are the tickets?
£7.
£7. Great. That sounds fantastic, Andy. Now, if somebody wanted to find out a bit more about the screening, where could they go?
They could follow me on Instagram on Cucumber Lodge, which is the name that we'll be running the events and series under, which comes from just a lot of social gatherings, personal ones, and then what we want to be doing really with this kind of like the social events as Cucumber Lodge is be taking it to the next level in terms of music, in terms of cinema. So I think like what's fantastic is Scalarama like definitely provides that platform for us.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we'll very much look forward to seeing those films. Good luck with the screening, and we'll see you there.
Yeah, see you there. Thanks very much for having me. And again, 14th and 20th of September for Young Soul Rebels and Electro Moscow. Thanks very much, guys.
And we just made a little correction to that Young Soul Rebels is on the 15th, not the 14th.
So we're joined today in the studio by Ruby Hahn, who is responsible for the Out at the Cameo screenings of LGBT films, which is monthly at the Cameo. Is that right, Ruby?
Yeah, so not solely responsible. We are can't take all the credit. We are a group of young programmers at the Cameo, and yeah, we screen monthly LGBT films. That's everything from films with LGBT content to sort of campy cult classics like Barbarella. Yeah, but we do that once a month.
Great, that sounds fantastic. So you're getting involved in this year's Scalarama programme, and what is it you're putting on for the Edinburgh audiences?
So we're going to be screening My Beautiful Launderette.
My Beautiful Launderette. Now, can you tell us a bit about the film, about why you want to screen it?
Okay, well, one of the reasons we chose My Beautiful Launderette is because despite being over 30 years old, the issues that it discusses, immigration and British identity and the far right, are unfortunately all still in the news. So I think it remains really relevant despite having come out in 1985. And it's nice to be screening it in Edinburgh because Edinburgh was partly responsible for its success. It got its first mainstream cinema release because it did so well at the Edinburgh Film Festival. So I think it's nice to have it on in Edinburgh.
Yes, it's like it's coming home, really.
Yeah.
I guess. So yeah. So and when is the film on?
So film's on Thursday 12th at 6 p.m.
And what's the venue?
Cameo Cinema.
Cameo, yeah, of course, right. That sounds fantastic. So, so we're looking forward to that. Now, a bit about Out the Cameo. How long's that been running, and what's the plans for the group going forward?
So we've been running since summer last year, I believe. Our first screening was last September, so we're coming up to our year anniversary, which is really exciting. At the moment, we're just looking for more people to join us, because while we get a lot of help from Cameo in terms of actually putting on the screening, we organise everything ourselves, and we're just looking for more people to join us to share the workload. It's really good fun. It's a great way to meet other LGBT young people in Edinburgh and cinema fans that you can nerd out with. But yeah, we're looking for new people to join us. So if you're interested after hearing this, please do find us on social media.
Great, it sounds fantastic. Now, good luck with the screening of My Beautiful Launderette. When was that again? It was the
12th, or Thursday 12th at 6 p.m.
At 6 p.m. Yeah, great, at the Cameo. Okay, well, thanks for coming along, Ruby, and we'll look forward to the screening, and we wish you all the best with it.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's about it for August at Cinetopia. Thank you to Sean and Megan, Serena, Andy and Ruby, and Mark for your interviews, as well as Luka, Jim and Amanda for your thoughts on this month's feature films. For more events on the events across Scalarama in September in Edinburgh and beyond, check out the website scalarama.com. Cinetopia Radio Show is hosted and produced by myself, Paul Bruce, Amanda Rogers, Annie Asakainen and Jim Ross. For more information about Cinetopia, please go to cinetopiahub.com or follow us on social media at Cinetopia Hub. Thanks and see you next month.